So we're here on Daf Kuf Tes Vav Amid Beis. And just to summarize, yesterday we discussed two different topics. One topic was Bala, if he had a Belia without Le'isa, meaning he didn't taste the tam, and we differentiated between Matzah and Morar, Bala Matzah Yara, Bala Morar Lo Yatza. And we discussed the issue of matzah mevusheles, if he cooks the matzah and it doesn't have a tam. And the second topic we discussed yesterday was akiras hashulchan, and the issue was whether or not every single person at the table should be equipped with his own shulchan of matzah, morar, and charoses. And we tried to explain that according to Rav Huna, the answer is in the positive. Yes, we have to guarantee that everyone has their own matzah, and that's so that the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, which they may hear from the Koreas HaGoda, but yet it should be related to the matzah that they will eat for the mitzvah of achilas matzah. Meaning, there's got to be a tziruf, a connection between the recitation of the Haggadah and the matzah that he's going to eat for the mitzvah. And this leads us to Omar Shmuel. So let's see if we could find Omar Shmuel. And we are almost towards the bottom of Kuf Tes Vav Amid Beis. And we're going to count up from the bottom of the Amid 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up from the bottom. Now the pasuk tells us in Parshas Re'eh, Dvarim Tezayin, it says, Lo sochal olav chametz, shivas yomim tochal olav matzos, lechem oni. Amar Shmuel, why is matzah called lechem oni? And Shmuel has a very unique answer to this question. Lechem oni is lechem sha'onim olav dvarim. We respond or we recite various things on the lechem. And therefore the word oni doesn't mean the bread of affliction or the bread of a poor person, but rather the word oni is to be interpreted as aniyah. Aniyah means recitation. And Rashi, the Rashbam, both try to explain what exactly are we required to say over the lechem to make it into lechem oni? And the answer seems to be both in Rashi. Rashi is not here, actually. Rashi is on Daf Lamed Vav. Shegomrim olav es hahalel, v'omrim olav haggadah. So Rashi has two recitations that make the matzah into lechem oni when you recite these over the matzah. Number one is halel, but Rashi says gomrim olav es halel. It's a complete halel. And omrim olav haggadah. The Rabbeinu Chananel, on the other hand, and all this you'll see in footnote number lamed, omrim olav haggadah matzah zu sha'anu ochlim. That we point to the matzah and we explain why we're going to eat this matzah. And as far as halal is concerned, which Rashi included under lechem oni, shegomrim olav es halal, Rabbeinu Chananel, and for that matter Tosfos, omit halal from this discussion. And the reason for that is because their shita is that Hallel is to be recited at the time of the Achilas HaPesach, which is Al Asova, which is at the end of the entire Seudah, after he finished already the entire Haggadah. So that the matzah has already been eaten after he completed the Haggadah, the Magid, and when he gets to the end of the Seudah, which at the time when the Mikdash stood would be the Achilas HaPesach, that's what he recites Hallel. And I think this is based on a Gemara, which I don't have right this second in front of me, on Daf Tzadi Hey, this particular Gemara starts on Tzadi Tes, but in Tzadi Hey, the Gemara establishes that at the time that they eat the Korban Pesach, they would recite Hallel. Now the question is, how do we derive this halacha that at the time of the Achila of the Korban Pesach, that's appropriate for the recitation of Hallel? And it would seem that Tosfos derives that halachic mandate from the pasuk Lechem Oni Sha'onim Olav Dvarav Harbe, which would mean that Tosfos belongs to the camp of Rashi, not to the camp of Rabbeinu Chananel. You know, when you read this, you see Ke'ein Zeh. After he quotes Rabbeinu Chananel, he writes Ke'ein Zeh. You'll see that on the third line down of this footnote. But it's really not Ke'ein Zeh. And why is that? Because we're going to derive the requirement of Hallel, of Kriyas HaHallel, at the time of the Pesach from Lechem Oni, Sha'onim Olav Dvarim Harbe. So it's possible that we should differentiate between two different schools of thought. And the issue is, why are we reciting Hallel at the time of the Achilas HaPesach? One school of thought, which is that of the Meiri, would derive that requirement of Hallel b'shas Achilas HaPesach from Lechem Oni, Sha'onim Olav Dvarim Harbe. But according to the Meiri, we're going to have to make a jump, a leap of faith. The premise that underlies the Meiri is that the mitzvah of matzah, like the mitzvah of Korban Pesach when the Mikdash stood, but the matzah even today is at the end of the meal. So that the matzah that we eat at the beginning of the meal is not the ikar mitzvah of achilas matzah, but rather the ikar mitzvah of achilas matzah should be ala sova, when he's satiated, at the end of the meal. And at that moment, he should be reciting Hallel because of the requirement of Onim Olav Dvarim Harbe, to make the lechem into lechem Oni. But there's another school of thought, according to which the lechem Oni is not related to Korban Pesach and Achilas HaPesach. Achilas HaPesach, argues Rabbeinu Chananel, requires Hallel midin Achilas HaPesach. Let's not make a jump and an analogy to matzah. And therefore the Ikar Achilas matzah is at the beginning of the Suda after Magid. So there's no way we can integrate that into Lechem Oni. What I need to say is that to integrate Lechem Oni Sha'onim Olav Dvarim Harbe, it's got to be somehow introduced into the fabric of Magid before the Achilas HaMatzah. The fact that Pesach itself and its Achila generates a Chi of Hallel, that has nothing to do with the Matzah. According to the Meiri, it has a lot to do with the Matzah, because the Ikar Matzah is eaten at the time that coincides with the Achilas HaPesach. Like the pasuk says, "Al matzah sumrom yochluhu," that he's eating the Korban Pesach together with matzah. And our matzah, like the matzah at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, is to be eaten at the end of the meal at the time of the recitation of Hallel. So the Machayev of Hallel applies not just to the Achila of Pesach, but also to the mitzvah Achilas Matzah. That's lechem oni. And lechem oni means that the matzah requires amiras halil. So the amiras halil is on the matzah. So it's really interesting because you've got the first achilas matzah that succeeds the Sifrei Tzis Mitzrayim. So we begin with Sifrei Tzis Mitzrayim prior to achilas matzah, and now we have set up shall we call it a 50% of lechem oni. The other 50% will be supplied by Hallel later on. That's going to be recited at a time that coincides with the Korban Pesach, al asova, after the meal. And it sounds to me as if there are two lechem onis here. There's a lechem oni of Sifrei Tzis Mitzrayim, and that's the Kizayis Matzah Barishona after Sipur. And then there's a lechem oni of Hallel with the second Kizayis of Matzah that's eaten at the end of the meal, way, way beyond Sifrei Tzis Mitzrayim. Now, if that was if I was trying to explain some way out shita, a das yochid, but we're talking about Rashi and we're talking about Tosfos. We're not talking about some, obscure shita that, could be put into a footnote. We're dealing with the simple pshat in our Gemara of Shmuel, which is a doraisa halacha of lechem oni. Now, I can't promise you it's doraisa, but it seems that that's how Shmuel understood the mandate given by the Torah itself of lechem oni. And the Torah says, lo tochal olav chametz, etc., etc., but tochal olav matzos lechem oni. Tochal olav, that's a mitzvah doraisa. The Torah is commanding to eat what kind of matzah? It doesn't just say matzah, it says matzah lechem oni. And according to Rashi, what Shmuel interpreted lechem oni, sha'onim olav Torah maharbi, includes both the Haggadah and the Hallel. At the end of the Seder, right before Nirtzah. We're way beyond, the Achilas Matzah Barishona. We have left Sifrei Tzis Mitzrayim. We're already at Shulchan Aruch. We're going to open up the door for Eliyahu, Shvach HaMaschal HaGoyim, and then we're going to get to Hallel. And that Hallel establishes the matzah as lechem oni. But I'm suggesting that there are two achilos, and there are two matzos, and there are two lechem onis, and there are two ways in which we convert and transform and upgrade the matzah into lechem oni. One is the first kizayis through magid, and the second is a kizayis b'achrona through Hallel. And this might explain, those Rishonim that require that you eat hal before chatzos, because the mitzvah of matzah, like the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, should be fulfilled before chatzos, according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, ein ha-Pesach nechal elad chatzos. Rabbeinu Chananel, on the other hand, is a little bit simpler. because he understands Shmuel lechem shonim olav dvar harbe as referring exclusively to the Haggadah. And therefore it's related to the first matzah that we eat as motzi matzah after Magid. The recitation of Hallel is not generated by lechem oni, shonim olav dvar harbe, but rather by the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. And Achilas HaPesach generates Hallel. And that's a sugya back on Daf Tzadi Hey. Tanya Nami Hachi. The Gemara now quotes a brayso to support Shmuel. Lechem oni, lechem sha'onim olav dvarim harbe. Now, I'm wondering if the word oni, describing the lechem of matzah's lechem oni, could tolerate more than one interpretation. For example, we have something called matzah ashira, and it's matzah, but it's not lechem oni. And it's made, let's say, of a mixture of oil or other fruit juices. And we cannot fulfill our mitzvah of achilas matzah through matzah shira. In fact, you may recall that at the very beginning of our Pesachim, when we were discussing the Isser of eating before nightfall, etc., etc., we mentioned the possibility of eating matzah shira. Even though kol ochel matzah be'erev Pesach havi kebol arusasu beis chamav, that's not a good thing. But we said that that's only matzah ru'il mitzvah. But matzah shira is not ru'il mitzvah. Now, why not? It's matzah. The admixture of fruit juices doesn't undermine and negate the shem matzah, but it's not lechem oni. Lechem oni is a basic bread of a poor man. It's made of two ingredients, and that's it, water and flour. No other ingredients. Now, Shmuel says that oni means onim olav dvarim harbe. Hayitochen, could it pass through our minds that according to Shmuel, lechem of matzah shira would qualify for the mitzvah of matzah? Impossible. Or, for example, we're about to embark on the sugya of prusa, that the matzah should be broken, it should not be whole. Not a shlema, but a prusa. And that's also derived from lechem oni. Let's just read it inside. Davrach lechem oni, oni ksiv. Ma oni shedarko beprusa is therefore we require a prusa, not a pashlema, but a prusa. And that's derived from lechem oni. Is the Gemara implying a critique, a criticism, or an objection to Shmuel? Shmuel, what are you going to do with the brisa of prusa? You're deriving oni sha'onim olav dvarim harbe. The brisa is deriving from oni that it's referring to an oni v'evya. In fact, there may be a difference in how to write the word oni between Shmuel and this brisa of prusa. According to Shmuel, we're talking about oni, ayin vav, milashon oneh, right, to recite lechem sha'onim olav dvarim harbe. You need the vav after the ayin. According to the brisa of prusa, we're talking about lechem of an oni, ayin, nun, yud without a vav. It's not oni biloshan aniya lo onim, but rather oni biloshan oni, a poor person, and a poor person eats some prusa. But I'm tempted to think that according to Shmuel, we add an additional interpretation of lechem oni. We're not undermining and negating the basic understanding of lechem oni without the vav. It doesn't say there's no vav in the Torah. It says lechem oni. Now we're accepting that means a poor person. Therefore, darko shalani beprusa and lechem oni would exclude matzah shira. There may be a host of different halachas that we derive from lechem ani without the vav, and Shmuel is adding that we read it not in the siv but in the kri as lechem oni, as if there were a vav, and it means that we require recitations over the lechem. So Shmuel is not undermining that which we understood before Shmuel in terms of how to define lechem oni, but rather Shmuel is adding on top. It's like another koma, another floor on top of a building. But of course, we're not undermining the simple understanding of lechem oni without a vav, as it's written in the Torah. Now, I didn't hear any objection to what I said, so I'm assuming you agree with me. I don't know. If you disagree with me, please tell me. Now, we began footnote number lamed but we only covered the first part. That's the first paragraph. Let's see what we could find in the continuation of footnote number lam. In the second paragraph. Bibir aloshen sha'onim olav dvarim harbe, kosav aksav sofer, shekorban ha-pesach, Huzecha leguulas Mitzrayim. All right, that makes sense. Umodim u'mishabchim olav lashem. So we have to thank Hashem for Geulas Mitzrayim. Hamarar, on the other hand, Huzecha lemerirus hashibut. That's a negative. Umisaprim olav es dvar hashibud, what we call maskil bignus. So we have now Korban Pesach on the one hand, Zeichel Legula. We have Marar on the other hand, Zeichel Shibud. What about matzah? He says that matzah has tzvei dinim. Number one, it's gam Zeichel Legula. And number two, it's gam zeichel shibud. So that in the pyramid here, we have Pesach zeichel gula, we have Marar zeichel shibud, and then we get to matzah, which is the overlap that reflects both zeichel shibud and zeicher lecherus, legeula. Matzah zeichel gula ki bichapazon yotzasem me'eretz Mitzrayim. But matzah is also zeichel shibud because onim olav dvarim harbe. That lechem oni teaches me that we recite the shibud over the matzah, making the matzah into lechem oni a poor man's, impoverished man's bread. He's deriving the conclusion that lechem shonim olav dvarim harbe is shibud, is, the low part from the mitzvah of maskil bignus. So the Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim incorporates both maskil bignus, which is reference to the shibud, and Mesayim v'shvach, which is a reference to the geula. And both these dimensions are included in Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim. Now, what is the matzah? Well, we have Shmuel's drasha of onim olav dvarim harbe, which means Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim. Well, Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim includes both the maskil bignus of shibud and the Mesayim v'shvach of geula. Therefore, if A, Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim includes both shibud and geula, and B, matzah is lechem oni, and that is a reference to Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim, then the matzah itself must reflect both dimensions of Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim, the maskil bignus of shibud and the Mesayim v'shvach of geula. So the word onim refers to Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim, and that we said according to all Rishonim. Everybody agrees that onim refers to Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim. Machlokas is about Haleh. So if onim means Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim, then the premise that he's operating with is that Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim means the entire gamut of Sipur Mitzrayim, including both Secher L'Geula and Secher L'Shibud as well. And therefore, the onim olav dvarim harbe of the aniyah on the matzah means that the matzah is going to symbolize and reflect both dimensions of Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim, the shibud and the geula. Now, the fact that matzah should be a symbol of shibud doesn't surprise me. Even without maskil bignus and Mesayim v'shvach, Chazal tell us in the Midrashim that the Israelite slaves in Mitzrayim were supplied with matzah, to eat matzah. So when you talk about the shibud of Mitzrayim and you talk about matzah, there's a natural affinity between the two, even if I don't have the halacha of maskil bignus. And at this point, I'm very comfortable with Rashi's Shita in Shmuel that lechem sha'onim olav dvarim harbe includes not just the Haggadah, but also the Haleh. Why? Because if we establish that matzah is a symbol of geula, then modim u'mishabchim oleh al Hashem. We are obligated to thank and praise Hashem for the geula. How do we do that? Well, partially through Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. But partially we could say through Hallel. What greater Shevach is man capable of, in this case to thank Hashem for the redemption, than Amiras HaHallel. So I'm very comfortable now with Rashi's Shita that Onim Olav Dvarim Harbe includes not just the Sipur of of Magid, but Hallel as well. Now we open up the Magid with Holach Ma'anya, and we point to the matzah, and we describe it as Lechem Oni. What do we mean by Holach Ma'anya? Do we mean A, B, or C? Do we mean Zeichel Agula? Do we mean Zeichel Shibud, or both? And I'm inclined to think that according to Rav Soloveitchik, I'll explain to you why, the Holach Ma'anya is Zeichel Geula. Because you may recall, I think I mentioned it to you, that in Hare Kedem, Rav Soloveitchik is quoted as saying that how do we demonstrate the Geula, the fact that we are Nig'olim, by saying Holach Ma'anya, Kol Dichvin Yesei V'yecha. We invite the guests, which means that we're free people. And therefore, with that freedom, we own our possessions, and we're free to invite people to our Seder table. So that seems to reflect on Holach Ma'anya as Zeichel Geula. Now, according to Hillel, we make a sandwich between the matzah and the maror. So I'm not sure which way to take that. Is that a contrast or an overlap and a unity? If it's the latter, then we're talking about lechem oni, zeichel shibud. And we have now a unity when we eat the matzah together with the maror. So it could be that according to Hillel, we should have two achilas of matzah. We should have one matzah without maror and one matzah with maror. The matzah without maror is zeichel geula. The matzah with maror is zeichel shibud. Now, when it comes to charoses, what would you say? Where would you classify charoses? If I was forcing your back against the wall and I gave you only two choices, it's either zeichel geula or zeichel shibud. Where would you put charoses? No answer? And the Gemara says charoses is zeichel tit. Right? The Jews were forced as slaves to create their own bricks out of some sort of a primitive cement. That they had to create the cement, the tit. Not only that, the Mitzrim would kill the firstborn Israelites by putting them into tit and making them part of the. It's hard to imagine the cruelty of it. So that would mean that charoses is zeichel shibud. But on the other hand, the Gemara has an alternative. Let's just see if we can find that. Yeah, the Gemara says on the top of the Amud here, Sarach lashkia b'charosos mishum kappa. So it's only a health issue. Dalid, Ahmed Aleph quotes Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok that charosis is a mitzvah. So fast forward for the moment, the Kuf Tes Zayin, Ahmed Aleph, my mitzvah, which is about, I'd say, 11 lines down from the top, I'm just guessing, is Rabbi Levi Omer Zeichel Tapuach, Rabbi Yochanan Omer Zeichel Tit. Now, Zeichel Tapuach is a miracle. Let me just see if the Rashbam. Zeichel Tapuach, the Rashbam says, you'll see it right on the right side near Likutei Rashi at the end of the. He says, "B'Masechtes Sota, shayoldos sham b'neiim below etzev, shelo yakiru b'hen ha'mitzrim, tichsiv tachas ha'tapuach oraticha." Sounds more like Secher Legu'ula. In fact, the ingredients that we use, according to our minhag, for charoses are all symbolic of psukim in Shir Hashirim. all of which indicate or reflect the love relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Knesset Yisrael. So I'm just suggesting the possibility that once we have this breakthrough, that matzah has a double symbolism to it. It's both Zecher L'Geula and Messiah B'Shvach, plus it has a symbolism of Zecher L'Shibud. It could be that Charoses also has this unique integration of both Maschil B'Gnus and Messiah B'Shvach, of Zecher L'Geula and Zecher L'Shibud. And since I didn't hear anyone object, I'm assuming you agree with me. All right. Yeshnam Shnei Makoros. We're back to footnote number Lamed. Baksuvim ubidrashas Chazal. Shemehem mashma shebeshas amiras hagoda tzricha lios hamatzah munachas al shulchan. If you remember yesterday, we read the instructions that at the time of Magid, we should reveal what's the opposite of cover? To expose, we'll say, to expose the matzah. And there are two sources for this. One is lechem oni, sha'onim olav dvarv harbe. So you don't want to conceal the matzah, you want to expose the matzah. And number two, bavur zeh. So it's interesting. The thought occurs to me that even if you were to reject Shmuel and accept the Brisa and read it as Lechem Oni, not Oni, but Oni, Darko Shaloni Beprusa, we would still accept the fundamental halacha that the matzah should be there and exposed at the time of Sipitis Mitzrayim, not because of Shmuel, because we may reject Shmuel in favor of the Brisa, but because of Bavur Zeh. B'shosh yesh matzah umar munachim lefanecha. He says that Drashas HaPosuk Bavur Zeh ba be'ikra likvoa ezman mitzvah Sipitis Mitzrayim shechiyuv b'shah haru'uya L'kiyum mitzvahs matzah umar, as opposed to Mibod Yom or Rosh Chodesh. Ach ein kavanosa l'lamed she'hanochas matzah umar lefanav tehei ba'akeves b'mitzvahs hasipur. So he's now shifting the entire derivation of Bavur Zeh from a definition of how to fulfill Sipitis Mitzrayim, or alternatively Achilas Matzah, and shifting it to Zman. The question is, at what time, at what point in time does the mitzvah of Sipur emerge? Omnom, Yesh Misha Mitzadeh, Shalidas Halachos Gedolos, Or makeves b'mitzvah sipur yitzias Mitzrayim. That the Torah requires sipur bavur zeh over the matzah. The ultimate integration between sipur b'peh and the matzah. There's no mitzvah of sipur without the matzah. I don't know what the Bahag would say if I don't have matzah. Does that mean I forfeit the entire overhaul, the entire mitzvah of sipur yitzias Mitzrayim? Oh yeah, he says it explicitly. V'chol she'ein lo matzah u'morer eino misaper b'yitzias Mitzrayim mikoach droshas hakosu bavur zeh v'shosh yesh matzah u'morer munochem u'fanecha al shulchanecha. Obvious hamatzah l'shulchan v'shas avir sagore v'rishon misug yoseinu shkein tzorch lanos olav dvorim harbe v'chein yesh min harishonu shenoktu shein tzorch lahovius hamatzah lefonov el b'shah sha'omrim Rav Gamliel matzah zu kidei lanos u'lefarish oleh estam mitzvahs achilos. Then we're wondering, is the bavur zeh a halacha in matzah, perhaps, or more precisely, more accurately, the halacha of lechem oni is halacha in matzah, which it certainly is. All right. So where do we get up to? We're up to Daf Kuf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph. Correct? So please make a note of that. And the Mitzvah Hashem, B'li Neder, in about 6 minutes, we'll start a little bit of Sanhedrin. Followed at 11 o'clock with Sefer Mitzvahs La Rambam, with the Ramban's Ha'ora on Shorish Aleph, and at 12:15, a discussion about Parshat, Parshat Negoim of Tazria al Pi Ramban. Okay then? So we'll be starting soon